A homeless girl finds a suitcase of cash belonging to a millionaire who was on the verge of death. When she expressed what she wanted in return, the millionaire began to cry. The busy city streets were alive with people, but one person, Sophie, was alone. She was sitting in the shadows of a tall building, her clothes old and ripped. She held out her shaking hand, hoping someone would give her some food. She felt forgotten in a world that didn't seem to notice her. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, something special happened. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in beautiful colors, Sophie noticed something next to a trash can. It was a fancy leather suitcase. Her heart raced as she approached it. This suitcase looked very out of place among the garbage and broken dreams of her life. With nervous fingers, she unzipped it and gasped. Inside were stacks of crisp, shiny bills, more money than she had ever seen. For a moment, she imagined what her life could be like if she had all that money. She could buy food, find a home, and start fresh. But then she thought, "This isn't my money. Someone must be looking for it." Feeling heavy in her heart, Sophie closed the suitcase and looked around, hoping to find its owner. Suddenly, a man appeared. He was wearing a nice suit that looked very different from Sophie's torn clothes. His eyes were filled with worry as he spotted the suitcase in her hands. "Is that mine?" he asked, his voice shaking. Sophie nodded and said softly, "I found it. I didn't take anything." The man, who introduced himself as Nathan, looked relieved and thankful. His worried eyes sparkled with tears. In that moment, they both felt a special connection that would change their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Around them, the city was loud with honking cars and busy people, but Sophie just sat quietly on the street corner. She had a cardboard sign that said, "Hungry, please help." The smell of car exhaust and food carts made her stomach growl. She hadn't eaten much, just a half-eaten sandwich from the night before. She closed her eyes, trying to gather strength for another day of hunger. Just as she was about to give up and find a place to sleep, she saw the suitcase again. It was still there, hiding behind some old newspapers near the trash. Curiosity got the better of her, so she walked over to the suitcase. The street was still busy, with people walking by, but nobody noticed her. When she unzipped it, her breath stopped. Inside were the same stacks of money. It felt like time stopped. She thought, "This money could change everything." But then she thought again, "This isn't mine." Suddenly, she heard footsteps coming closer. She looked up and saw Nathan again. He looked worried, his eyes darting around until they landed on the suitcase. "Is that my suitcase?" he asked, hope mixed with worry in his voice. Sophie nodded and said, "I found it here. I didn't take anything." Nathan quickly checked the suitcase and smiled. He was so relieved everything was there. "You could have taken this money and walked away," he said. "Why didn't you?" Sophie replied, "It wouldn't be right. I wouldn't be happy knowing it belongs to someone else." Nathan looked at her closely. He seemed to see something special in her. "An honest person like you is rare these days," he said. "What's your name?" "Sophie," she answered, surprised that he cared. Nathan took a deep breath and said, "I want to make you an unusual offer. I'm sick, and I've worked hard to earn money, but now I need something money can't buy." Sophie listened carefully as Nathan continued, "Your honesty touched me. I'd like you to think about marrying me. I don't want to leave my money to people who don't need it. I think you would use it to help others." Sophie was shocked. This was like something from a movie. She thought about the idea of being safe and not worrying about food anymore. But when she looked into Nathan's eyes, she saw that he was lonely. "Mr. Nathan," she said softly, "I'm really moved by your offer, but I can't marry you just for your money. That wouldn't be right." Nathan looked sad, but Sophie wasn't finished. "If you'd like, I can help you in a different way. You said you're sick. Maybe I could take care of you, and instead of leaving me your money, you could help others in need." Nathan stared at her, amazed. Here was a woman with almost nothing, yet she was offering to care for him without asking for anything in return. "You would do that?" he asked, his voice full of emotion. Sophie smiled. "Everyone deserves kindness. Using your money to help others would be a great way to be remembered." Tears filled Nathan's eyes. "You are an extraordinary person. Most people don't have your kindness," he said. "I accept your idea, and I would be honored to have you in my life, even if not as my wife." Sophie felt relief wash over her. She had stayed true to her values and might be able to make a real difference in the world. "Thank you, Mr. Nathan," she said. "I promise I'll do my best to help you and ensure your legacy is kind." They stood together on the busy street, two unlikely friends brought together by honesty, not knowing what adventures were waiting for them. As the sun went down, Nathan smiled at Sophie. "Would you like to join me for dinner? There's a little pizza place nearby I've always wanted to try." Sophie felt shy and looked at her old clothes. "I'm not sure I'd fit in at a restaurant," she said quietly. Nathan smiled gently. "Sophie, your worth isn't about what you wear. Please let me treat you to a meal as a thank you for your kindness." With a small nod, Sophie agreed, and they walked to the pizzeria together. As they walked, the smell of fresh pizza made Sophie's stomach growl again. She felt embarrassed, but Nathan didn't notice. He chatted about the neighborhood as they walked. The pizzeria was warm and cozy, with pretty checkered tables. When they entered, Sophie felt nervous and out of place, but Nathan took her to a quiet booth. "Order whatever you want," he said kindly. Sophie looked at the menu, amazed at all the choices. It had been so long since she could choose what to eat. When their pizza arrived, it looked delicious. Sophie couldn't believe how good it smelled. As they ate, Nathan opened up about his life and his illness. "I achieved everything I wanted," he said sadly. "But now I see how empty it all feels without real friends." Sophie listened, feeling sad for Nathan. Even with all his money, he felt alone, just like she had on the streets. As they shared their stories, they felt closer. What began as a chance meeting turned into a real friendship built on trust and understanding. "Sophie," Nathan said as they finished their meal, "thank you for everything. Your kindness is exactly what I needed in my life." Sophie smiled, feeling happy. "Thank you, Nathan. This dinner means a lot to me too." When they stepped outside into the cool night, both Sophie and Nathan felt excited about what the future could bring. They had met by chance, but their friendship had the power to change their lives. Little did they know that many challenges lay ahead that would test their bond and show them how powerful kindness can be. As time passed, Sophie settled into Nathan's beautiful apartment. It was a huge change from living on the streets, but she focused on keeping her promise to care for Nathan during his illness. They had no idea how their adventure would unfold, but both were ready for whatever came next. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching the city lights twinkle below, Nathan turned to Sophie with a serious face. "Sophie, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "My condition is getting worse. The doctors say they haven't found a bone marrow donor for me yet." Sophie listened carefully, her heart sinking at his words. She reached out and took his hand to show her support. "Without a bone marrow transplant, the doctors can't help me anymore. I have maybe 1 month to live," he continued, his words hanging in the air. Sophie felt a mix of sadness and fear, and a strong wish to help. She thought about donating her own bone marrow, but hesitated. "Nathan, I don't know what to say," Sophie stammered. The idea of undergoing such a procedure scared her. As she considered the risks, a memory from her past surfaced. At 16, Sophie had gone on a fun adventure with friends, but it quickly turned scary. She slipped on a mossy rock by a rushing river and fell into the cold water. Fighting to stay above, she felt her lungs burning. Just when she thought she would drown, a stranger, a middle-aged man fishing nearby, jumped in and saved her. As she coughed up water on the riverbank, she saw the man was pulled under by the current. Despite efforts to save him, he never came back up. This memory haunted her. She felt grateful that someone had saved her life, but also guilty because she never learned his name. Now, looking at Nathan's tired face, Sophie realized how much her past and present mirrored each other. Once again, she had a chance to save a life, but this time, she could choose to help. "Sophie," she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "I want to get tested to see if I'm a good match for a donor." Nathan's eyes widened in surprise. "Sophie, no. I can't ask you to do that. It's too much." But Sophie shook her head, a determined look in her eyes. "You're not asking. I'm offering. Years ago, a stranger saved my life at the cost of his own. I've thought about that every day since then. Now I have a chance to help you and give you the second chance at life that I was given." As she spoke, Sophie felt lighter, as if she were finally doing something she should have done long ago. "Are you sure about this?" Nathan asked, his voice full of emotion. Sophie nodded, squeezing his hand. "I am. We don't know if I'll be a match, but I want to try. It's not just about the risks, it's about continuing the kindness that saved me." Tears filled Nathan's eyes as he pulled Sophie into a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered. They held each other tightly, feeling a strong connection. Their journey had taken a surprising turn, revealing how deep their friendship was and how strong the human spirit could be. The next morning, Sophie went with Nathan to the hospital for the test. While waiting for the results, she reflected on how much her life had changed, from being homeless to potentially saving the life of a man she now called a dear friend. When the doctor came in, he broke the news. "Sophie," he said, excitement in his voice, "the results show that you're a good match." The news hit them like a wave of happiness. Nathan broke down in tears, feeling relief and gratitude, while Sophie felt both joy and nervousness. They knew the road ahead would be tough, but they were ready to face it together. Their friendship, which started with honesty, had become something very special. On the day of the bone marrow transplant, there were feelings of hope and fear. Sophie and Nathan were admitted to the hospital, their rooms next to each other. They shared a final moment together. "Sophie," Nathan said, his voice trembling, "I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. Whatever happens, know that you've already given me more than I could have hoped for." Sophie squeezed his hand, fighting back tears. "We're in this together, Nathan. I'll see you on the other side." As Sophie was wheeled into the operating room, the bright lights and the beeping machines made her anxious. She closed her eyes, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. Dr. Hayes, the lead surgeon, approached Sophie with a friendly smile. "Are you ready? We'll take good care of you." Sophie nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm ready. Please just make sure Nathan is okay." As the anesthesia started to work, Sophie's world went black. Hours passed as the surgical team carefully took out her bone marrow. When Sophie woke up in recovery, her first thought was about Nathan. "How is he?" she asked the nurse, checking her vitals. "The transplant was successful," the nurse replied with a smile. "Mr. Nathan is still in recovery, but the initial signs are good." Relief washed over Sophie, but alarms suddenly went off in Nathan's room. The calm recovery area became busy with medical staff rushing to help him. Sophie's heart raced as she tried to hear what was happening. The next few hours were filled with worry and fear as Nathan fought for his life. Even though she was still weak from her own surgery, Sophie could do nothing but wait and hope for him. As dawn broke, Dr. Hayes entered Sophie's room, looking tired. "Sophie," he said, his tone serious. "Nathan had some complications during the night. We managed to stabilize him, but he slipped into a coma. The next 48 hours will be critical." This news hit Sophie hard. She had done everything she could, but it might not be enough. Just then, Nathan's family arrived at the hospital, led by his mother, Margaret. "Where is she?" Margaret shouted, scanning the room until her eyes found Sophie. "What have you done to my son?" Sophie, still groggy and in pain, felt scared by her accusation. "I was trying to help him," she stammered. Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Help him? By putting him in a coma? We know all about you. You're a homeless gold digger. You tricked Nathan when he was weak." The noise drew the attention of hospital staff. Dr. Hayes spoke up, trying to calm the situation. Sophie volunteered to donate her bone marrow. The complications are a risk of the procedure, not her fault. But Margaret wouldn't listen. "I don't believe you. We'll be pressing charges for elder abuse." Sophie felt everything spinning. She just wanted to help, but now she might lose not just Nathan but her freedom too. Then, a gentle hand touched her arm. It was Grace, a nurse who had been taking care of her. "Don't worry, dear," Grace whispered. "We know the truth. Just focus on getting better." As she closed her eyes, exhausted, Sophie prayed for Nathan to recover and for the strength to face whatever would happen next. The following days were hard and full of tension. Sophie stayed by Nathan's side, holding his hand and hoping he would wake up. On the third day, she fell asleep in a chair next to his bed. Suddenly, she felt a gentle pressure on her hand. She opened her eyes to see Nathan looking at her, confused but awake. "Nathan," Sophie gasped, tears streaming down her face. "You're awake. How do you feel?" Nathan blinked slowly and whispered, "What happened? Why are you crying?" Before she could answer, nurses and doctors rushed in, alerted by the change in his condition. Dr. Hayes smiled warmly at Nathan. "Welcome back, Mr. Nathan. You gave us quite a scare, but it seems the worst is over." As Nathan recovered, he and Sophie formed a bond built on trust and support. Eventually, Margaret began to soften. One day she entered Sophie's room, looking vulnerable. "Can we talk?" she asked. Sophie nodded. "I've been so angry," Margaret admitted. "But seeing how you've been here for him, I realize how wrong I was." With time, they built a bridge of understanding and empathy. Months later, Nathan left the hospital. The first thing he wanted to do was take Sophie out for lunch to celebrate. As they sat at a small cafe, sipping iced tea, Nathan looked at Sophie with a warm smile. "I can't believe I'm here thanks to you. You're my hero." Sophie smiled back, feeling happier than she had in a long time. Through their bond, they inspired others to act with kindness and courage. Their story became a beacon of hope, showing that love and compassion could change lives, even in the darkest moments. Together, they faced whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing they had found true friendship and a second chance at life. Nathan and Sophie were in a hospital room. Nathan was recovering from a serious problem, and Sophie was there to support him. Nathan felt sorry for everything Sophie had gone through, and he thanked her for not giving up on him. Sophie squeezed his hand and promised she would always be there for him. As Nathan got better, he used his power and money to help Sophie. He made sure that nobody could take legal action against her, even if his family didn't like it. When Nathan was ready to leave the hospital, he talked to Sophie about what they could do next. "You gave me a second chance at life, and I want to help others, just like you said when we first met," he said. Sophie's face lit up. "I would love to help you create something special." They left the hospital knowing that their adventure was just beginning. They had been through a lot together, and now they were ready to make a difference. Nathan's big house, which used to feel lonely, was now a busy place where they helped people. They started a foundation to help those who needed medical care but couldn't afford it. They turned the fancy ballroom into a free clinic and made the beautiful gardens a peaceful place for patients and their families. Sophie, who had lived on the streets, had great ideas for their work. She wanted to help people, not just for a little while but for a long time, so they could get back on their feet. Nathan, who was excited about his new life, worked hard, and together they got a lot of helpers and donations for their foundation. One sunny day, while they sat on a terrace, Nathan smiled at Sophie. "You know, when I first asked you to help me, I never thought we would end up doing all this." Sophie laughed and said, Life is full of surprises. I went from being homeless to helping so many people. Nathan squeezed her hand, saying, "You changed my life in ways I can't even explain." Their friend Grace, a kind nurse from the hospital, interrupted them with news. The new family just arrived. They're waiting in the welcome center. Sophie and Nathan exchanged excited looks because they had just started a program to help families stay close to their loved ones in the hospital. As they walked to meet the new family, they heard happy kids playing in the new playground. The family they met was tired and worried. The father needed surgery. Sophie smiled warmly, making them feel welcome. "We're so glad you're here. Let's get you settled, and then we can talk about how we can help you," she said. Later that night, while planning for the future, Nathan had a big idea. What if we expand our foundation? We could help even more people in different cities and maybe even other countries. Sophie's eyes sparkled with excitement. "That would be amazing, but it's a big job. Are you sure you're ready for it?" Nathan laughed and said, "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything." As they worked on their plans, they felt proud. Their chance meeting on the street had turned into something wonderful that helped many people. They realized that a little kindness could change the world. As night fell, Sophie looked out at the foundation they had built. "When I was homeless, I never thought I could help create something like this," she said softly. Nathan wrapped an arm around her and replied, "And I never thought losing my wallet would lead to so much good." The next morning, while watching everyone start their day, Sophie remembered how she used to feel invisible. "Now, we're helping people feel valued," she said. Nathan agreed, saying, "It all started with you and your kindness." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Grace again, with good news. "Mr. Martinez is being discharged today, and his family wants to thank you." As they walked to the clinic, Sophie and Nathan felt happy seeing families reunited. When they met the Martinez family, Mrs. Martinez thanked them with tears in her eyes. "We can't thank you enough. You've given us our lives back." Sophie hugged her and said, "We're just glad we could help. That's what this place is all about." As the Martinez left, Sophie and Nathan felt proud of what they had created. "You know," Nathan said, "I used to think building wealth was all about money, but this, what we're doing, is a real legacy." Sophie nodded, saying, "Life is funny like that. We both started in different places but ended up right here, where we needed to be." When they reached their office, they paused to look at all they had built together. "Sophie," Nathan said softly, "I'm so grateful for you. You taught me that true wealth isn't about having money. It's about helping others." Sophie smiled, her eyes shining. "And you showed me that one person can change the world with kindness." As they got ready to continue their work, they felt ready to face more challenges together. Their story began with a simple act of kindness, and it had turned into something beautiful. They knew that every day, they could make a difference by helping others. Thank you for joining us in Sophie and Nathan's journey. Their story shows us how one small act of kindness can change the world, and how each of us can make a difference. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest inspiring and heartwarming stories and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comments section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.